There's a stretch of cracked earth north of Los Angeles that doesn't look like much from the road. Just dust, salt flats, and the kind of emptiness that makes you check your fuel gauge twice. But this dirt has heard sounds the rest of the world will never hear. Engines that screamed past Mach 3, tires that exploded under the weight of secrets, rocket motors lit at the edge of space. This is Edwards Air Force Base, and every barrier worth breaking in aviation history was broken right here. Let me tell you what happened in this desert. The fighter that lost in one. It's the early 1970s. Vietnam is winding down and the Air Force is doing some hard thinking. The big, expensive, complicated fighters of the previous decade hadn't always delivered. Pilots wanted something lighter, something that could turn, something that wouldn't bankrupt a country to keep flying. So the Air Force opened a competition. Build us a small, agile, affordable fighter, they said, show us what you've got. Northrop showed up with the YF-17 Cobra, and it was beautiful. Twin General Electric engines, a hybrid wing design that looked carved by wind itself, but the real genius sat at the wing roots, those large leading-edge extensions called legs. At high angles of attack they spun off vortices of swirling air that hugged the wings and refused to let go. Other fighters would stall and shake. The Cobra would just keep turning, pointing its nose wherever the pilot wanted. It was built for the knife fight, the kind of dogfight where seconds decide everything. Then General Dynamics rolled out the YF-16, single engine, lighter, cheaper to operate. The Air Force ran the numbers, looked at fuel costs, looked at the engine commonality with aircraft already in service and made their choice. The YF-16 won. It became the F-16 Fighting Falcon, one of the most successful fighters ever built. The Cobra should have died right there. But the Navy had been watching from the sidelines. They needed a replacement for their aging Phantoms and Corsairs, and one thing carrier pilots will never negotiate on is engines. Over the ocean with nowhere to land, you want two of them. The YF-16 had one. The Navy bought the loser. They enlarged it, navalized it, strengthened the gear for the punishment of carrier landings, and that aircraft born from the Cobra that didn't win became the FA-18 Hornet, later the Super Hornet, flown by navies around the world for decades. Sometimes losing the battle is just the beginning. The Titanium Phantom. Now lift your eyes higher, up to 70,000 feet where the sky goes black even in daylight. This is where the YF-12 lived, a two-seat interceptor built from titanium because aluminum would have melted at the speeds it flew. Mach 3 cruise. Sustained, not a sprint, not a flash in the pan. The thing would just sit at 3 times the speed of sound and burn through the stratosphere like it was made for that altitude, and it was. It carried the AIM-47 missile, which would launch from optimum cruise altitude and ride a collision course at Mach 6, aerodynamic range of 100 nautical miles. The pulse Doppler radar saw everything, even through enemy jamming. The infrared sensor caught supersonic targets at long range before they even knew they'd been spotted. From Britain, it could cover all of Europe, across the Pacific to the Philippines in 5 hours with 2 refuelings. From the edge of space, it watched the world. 9 world records, the first titanium airframe, the first sustained supersonic cruise, the first clutter-free pulse Doppler radar. The YF-12 was Kelly Johnson's skunk works stepping out of the shadows. Same DNA as the SR-71, same impossible speeds, same desert that learned to keep its secrets. The Phantom gets its claws. By the early 1970s, the F-4 Phantom had a problem. It was fast, it was powerful, it could carry the world. But Vietnam had taught hard lessons about close-in dogfights, and the Phantom, for all its strength, wasn't built for the turning fight. So they added leading-edge slats. It sounds small, it wasn't. The slatted F-4E became a different animal, smooth at high angles of attack where the old hard-wing Phantom would buffet and shake. The optimum turn happened at 23 to 25 units. Above that, the smoothness became dangerous, deceiving. The jet wouldn't warn you. The airspeed would just bleed away, quiet and quick, and a pilot who didn't respect that ceiling would find himself out of energy in a fight he couldn't get back into. That's the lesson Edwards taught. Every limit has a cost, every gift hides a trap. Britain's White Delta. Cross the ocean now? England, 1952, the atomic age has arrived and Britain wants its place at the table. The Royal Air Force needs a bomber that can fly higher and faster than anything before it, carry the deterrent and come home. Avro proposed something nobody had ever built at full scale. A delta wing, triangular, tailless. So radical they had to build a fleet of 1/3 scale prototypes, the Avro 707s, just to prove their math. The math held. What emerged was the Vulcan. Nearly 100 feet of wingspan painted in anti-flash white, a color chosen specifically to reflect the thermal flash of a nuclear blast. The test pilots couldn't believe how it flew, a bomber that handled like a fighter, a giant that could roll. The prototype VX-770 was the purest version before the kinked wing was added to solve buffet problems on the production aircraft. It became the ancestor of a legend, the symbol of Cold War Britain, the Great White Delta that proved the math was right. The Survivor. Back to the California desert, 1972, two prototypes circle each other in the sky. The Northrop YA-9 looked like a small fighter, sleek, fast, 100 miles per hour quicker than its rival, 2,000 pounds lighter. Test pilots loved how it handled. It even had a clever side force control system that let the pilot make small lateral adjustments without banking, perfect for strafing runs. The Fairchild YA-10 looked like nothing in the sky, stubby, slow, the pilots called it sluggish. But every strange angle on the YA-10 had a reason. The engines were mounted high on the tail so ground fire couldn't reach them and dirt couldn't get sucked in. Twin vertical tails meant it could fly home with one shot off. The pilot sat inside a titanium bathtub that weighed over 1,200 pounds, triple redundant flight controls, 2 hydraulic systems backed up by steel cables that would keep the jet flying even after catastrophic damage. The Air Force was building this aircraft around a weapon that didn't even exist yet, the GAU-8 Avenger, a 30mm rotary cannon meant to kill tanks. When they finally fitted it to the YA-10, the gun was almost too powerful. The propellant gas choked the engines and flamed them out. Engineers wired the trigger to the ignition system so the engines would relight themselves every time the pilot fired. January 1973, the Air Force chose the Survivor. The YA-10 became the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the pilots called it the Warthog, and for the next 50 years it would hunt tanks and protect troops in places the elegant YA-9 would never have come home from. The Valkyrie. And then there was the giant. The XB-70 Valkyrie was North Americans' answer to a question nobody else dared to ask. Could you build a bomber that cruised at Mach 3 at 70,000 feet? You couldn't build it from aluminum. Friction at that speed would melt the skin. So they built it from a honeycomb of brazed stainless
steel. It was Northrop's answer to the call for a new generation of air superiority fighter. The aircraft was a direct evolution of their earlier Cobra concept, refined and matured for the demanding Air Force competition. Its most striking features were its twin General Electric YJ101 engines and its unique hybrid wing design.
The tires were impregnated with aluminum
powder. The key to the YF-17's incredible maneuverability lay in its large leading-edge root extensions, or LERXs. These extensions generated powerful, swirling vortices of air that flowed over the wings at high angles of attack. This aerodynamic magic gave the Cobra exceptional agility and stability, allowing pilots to point its nose and turn with an authority that few other aircraft could match. It was a machine built from the ground up for the turning high-G environment of a close-range dogfight. The YF-17 was pitted against an equally revolutionary design, the single-engine General Dynamics YF-16. The competition was fierce. While both aircraft demonstrated incredible performance, the Air Force ultimately selected the YF-16, which would evolve into the legendary F-16 Fighting Falcon, citing its lower operating costs and commonality with an engine already in service. For the YF-17, losing the Air Force contract could have been the end of the story. But an entirely new opportunity was emerging. The U.S. Navy had been watching the competition with great interest. They needed a modern fighter to replace their aging F-4 Phantoms and A-7 Corsairs, but they required the added safety and redundancy of a twin-engine design for dangerous overwater carrier operations.